This podcast is brought to you by Sales Fuel Hire, a platform to help companies hire smarter and flag 13 toxic employee types. Measure job fit, sales tendencies and motivators, decision-making abilities, and empathy levels, and make your next hire your best hire. Try it now on salesfuel.com/hire and use promo code MANAGESMARTER for $50 off your first purchase. Welcome to the Manage Smarter podcast with hosts C. Lee Smith and Audrey Strong. We're glad you're here for discussions on new ways to manage smarter, hire, develop and retain talent, improve results, and propel team performance to new heights. This is the Manage Smarter podcast.
You know, Lee, our guest today says that anything that is substantial, really important and that's worth doing is hard.
I would agree with that. Yeah, I would say.
You said you had an agreement with that and another phrase to go with it.
I say if it was easy, everyone would have done it already.
What do you think, Mitch Schneider? Are we on the right track here?
I think so. I think the bottom line is that if it was easy, little old ladies and kids would be doing it, and you and I wouldn't have to worry about it.
Well, welcome to the Manage Smarter podcast, everyone. And Mitch Schneider is our guest today. I am Audrey Strong. I'm the Vice President of Communications here at Sales Fuel.
And I'm C. Lee Smith. I'm the President and CEO of Sales Fuel.
And so Mitch Schneider, let me tell you about him. He's a small business owner, trade journalist. What a life this guy has had. And the author of a new book called Misfire, What to Do When Things Aren't Running on All Cylinders. I think we've all had moments like that. Also an educator, an industry leader. And this book, Mitch, you describe it as the Who Moved My Cheese meets the Karate Kid. You want to tell us a little bit more what you mean by that?
Wax on, wax off.
Wax on. Well, to a large degree, all the great lessons I've learned in my life have been through failure, and many of them have been learned in a martial arts studio. And the first lesson you learn in the martial arts studio is that the ground is hard.
Yeah.
Okay.
Because you get knocked on your butt a lot, and you got to be able to get up, and you've got to be able to learn from whatever mistakes you made in the course of getting knocked down. So it happens as infrequently as possible, especially as you get older and older. So there's got to be a certain amount of wisdom that comes from all of that if you're lucky. And I was very lucky and had great teachers and wonderful mentors in the course of my life. So I think that's it. There are a lot of lessons in Eastern philosophy that I think translate very well and transfer very well into modern business. One thing that I noticed early on in my career is that it doesn't matter whether it's a large business or a small business, the number of tasks doesn't change. The difference is that in a small business, fewer people get to distribute those tasks. So it's important to be able to stay centered and to have control over yourself, because in many cases, you don't have a lot of control over the environment.
I think listening to you talk about that makes me think of, the hard ground or consequences. So if you do something wrong or whatever, you might get kicked in the head in the dojo. But if you don't have those types of consequences, in real life, if you let people, screw up basically, and there are no consequences for it or whatever, they never learn, they never get kicked in the head, they never fall to the ground, and so they're more prone to keep making the same mistakes over and over again.
Well, I think that's very true. I think and it's not representative of the real world, is it? I mean, the real world is kind of unkind and unforgiving in many cases when it comes to performance, and I think that's important for all of us to remember. Those are lessons that I learned the hard way. A very dear friend of mine tells a great story. It's called, and the basic thrust of the story is accountability. But when he was a regional sales manager for an automotive aftermarket parts company, they were in Pittsburgh in the winter, and his son, who was about 5 or 6 years old at the time, came in, and he was crying, and covered in slush and snow, and tears were cutting rivulets in the dirt on his face. And Ray turned around and looked at him and said, "Chris, what happened?" And he says, "Billy Johnson punched me in the face and threw me down the hill." And Ray's wife, Shirley, who's a very wise woman, turned around and said, "Christopher, start the sentence with I." And he said, Billy Johnson punched me in the face and pushed me down the hill. And she got up and walked over and took his little chin in her fingers and said, "Christopher, start the sentence with I." He says, I kicked Billy Johnson in the stomach, and then he punched me in the face. So, I think it's important if you're going to be successful in life in general to start the sentence with I, to recognize that the one constant in your life is going to be you. Mm-hmm. so you better take care of that.
And that sort of points to what you talk about in terms of motivation. Not everybody's motivated by the same thing. Teams and leaders, and similar to little Billy, I punched him in the stomach, was the motivator for that chain of events. Can you expand on that?
I think George Carlin, tells a funny story about the fact that the guy goes in a bookstore and he's looking at books on motivation. He turns around and he says, "You're in a bookstore. You're looking at books on motivation. You're already motivated. What do you need a book for?" So, I mean, I think that my dad, may rest in peace, and I were partners for 38 years in business. And he used to say all the time when I was starting out as a mechanic, you got to want to fix the car. Mm-hmm. You got to want to. That's the motivation. The motivation is the need, the desire to succeed, to accomplish whatever task you're confronted with.
And that looks different based on the person.
It looks different based on the person. It looks different based on the situation. Mm-hmm. And I think that's one of the reasons it's so important to be able to find your center and to be able to go ahead and quiet the world around you. And to me, that means a lot of Eastern philosophies, meditation especially. I'm very fortunate in that meditation for me, I'm not one of those people who does well with seated meditation. But in Tai Chi, for instance, there's moving meditation, and that's really good to stay centered. And breathing, something as simple as just breathing.
Mm-hmm. I'm going to take some analogies here. I'm going to run with it. So your title of your book, you're talking about when things aren't running on all cylinders. You're like my late father who just passed away this past year, Corvette owner.
Me too.
His is red, and C5 actually, and then you talk about misfire. So when there's a misfire of your Corvette, typically it means it's out of tune. So how do you, when someone has a misfire, how would you recommend helping give people a tune-up?
Well, it's really interesting. In the course of my trade journal writing, it occurred to me at one point that the four-stroke internal combustion engine is a perfect analogy for business. In many cases, intake, compression, power, exhaust, right? Intake is all the advertising and marketing you do to get people to come to your door. Compression is what you do with them once they're there. It's trying to find out what their needs, wants, expectations are, and trying to address those needs. Power is actually getting the work done, is addressing those wants, needs, and expectations successfully. And then exhaust is follow-up, getting the car out, and doing the warm fuzzies, ECRM and CRM stuff that creates a relationship and bonds that relationship between you and the client. So I think that has an awful lot to do with it.
What about those of us who drive Teslas?
Just be sure and check the app and make sure you know where you get the next charge.
And always make sure that you recharge yourself. That's right. That's what it means. Yes.
Now, some of these other concepts that are, East meeting West, you talk about, you said situational awareness, problem solving, reinvention, and mindfulness. Do you want to expand on those? Which of those is the most important, or are they all equal?
Reinvention's my favorite. I'm just saying.
Yep.
I'll get to reinvention in a second, but situational awareness is really important. You've got to understand the terrain that you're in. You've got to understand your environment. And you've got to understand, I believe with a perfect faith, that you've got to understand the fact that you have to be in control of that environment as much as you're able. And I think those things are really important. It's important on the street to be aware of your surroundings. They've done studies on this for years, and they say that people that appear to be aware of their surroundings or looking around, are not looking at their cell phone, are walking erect, are much less likely to be taken advantage of. I think the same thing happens in business, only with a different set of parameters there. Reinvention is critical because the world around us is changing every day. And if you're not capable of changing with it, if you're not aware of the changes, then you're going to be buried. Mm-hmm. But if you are aware of the changes, you have to recognize that what got you to where you are right now is not going to take you into the future. It's not even going to keep you safe in the present. and that the world is dynamic. If you're climbing the ladder of success and you decide you're going to take a break and hold on a second, standing still on that ladder of success is just a matter of how far behind you're getting, because the world is moving at breakneck speed away from you.
It's like a game of Frogger. Remember that video game?
Yeah.
You step out into the highway and you stand put, you're going to get smushed.
Yeah, no, I think that Misfire was my attempt to when I finished the book, it was going to be a legacy book, because I know this sounds overly dramatic, but when I finished the book in the course of writing it, after I was diagnosed in 2014 with bone marrow cancer, I thought it was going to be a legacy piece. I thought that was going to be a work that would, go beyond me.
Makes more sense to me. Yeah.
Fortunately, I tricked him. and I'm still here, a stem cell bone marrow transplant, and someone else's stem cells and now DNA has given me a second chance, a new lease on life, as it were.
So speaking of reinvention, then it's like, so all of a sudden now you like Middle Eastern food. What's up with that?
That's what your bio said.
What's up with that?
It's bizarre. It's just really bizarre. I never liked spicy food. I've got all kinds of spices in the refrigerator now. We went out from Italy. I had a zen for Middle Eastern food the other night. We had to go out so that I could have shawarma and falafel.
Yeah, because your donor was from which country?
He's Israeli.
Yeah.
I've got the DNA of an 18-year-old Israeli coursing through my veins.
Wow. Well, you have way too much wisdom to share with the world. You weren't ready to check out.
You're going to have to stick around for the sequel to your book.
Start writing now. So
Yeah.
The experience of a very serious illness like that, not a lot of people go through that, and we're so glad that you're having a good outcome. What are some of the lessons you want to share with our listeners from that unique experience?
I think that none of us realize or recognize the importance of the mind-body connection, and addressing that, being able to quiet your mind, being able to center yourself, being able to eliminate the monkey chatter that's always trying to fill your brain and undermine you, is critically important. A positive attitude is critical. And one of the things that you learn very early is, we're inundated in the news constantly with how bad things are. It doesn't matter whether you want to talk about economy, politics, whatever. Realization for me was that there were people that I didn't know that heard of my illness and showed up at the City of Hope in Duarte, California to donate blood and platelets. So people are genuinely good, and many of them are just searching for an opportunity to demonstrate that goodness. And I think that's an incredible lesson in and of itself. And it's reassuring to know that there are good people out there.
I think there are very few things in life that are not two-edged swords. So you can always look at things as, okay, oh, that's really terrible news, but it's like it might be very positive news for somebody else, or it might be very positive if you take a different perspective on it and look at it from a different angle, and all of a sudden you realize, oh, there's some positive things there. Anything that's positive can be made negative, and I think just about anything that's negative can be made positive. Some things, obviously, that don't apply to that, but most things I think do.
I think, it was interesting. I was told by one of my first editors that when I was bemoaning the fact that things were as bad as they were, especially on the news about, automotive ripoffs and whatever. And he says, Mitch, he says, what makes the news? What makes the news is the extraordinary, the bizarre, the strange, the unusual. He says, if all shop owners or the majority of shop owners weren't good, that's what would make the news. But the fact that the bad ones are making the news means that it's an aberration. And I think that's a good lesson also. I think it's important for all of us to realize that things just ain't as bad as people would like us to believe they are.
So try to find the positive.
Do you think your cancer gave you greater clarity?
Oh, absolutely. Absolutely. No question about that. When I walked, okay, Lee, here we go. When I walked out of the doctor's office, I was struck with blinding clarity and a moment of absolute freedom, recognizing that I didn't have to tolerate fools anymore. I knew instantly what was important. what was important are relationships. What's important are family. It sounds absurd to say that going through a stem cell bone marrow transplant, almost dying, being purposely taken to the brink of death, and then coming back is a good thing. But it was probably the most important, best thing that's ever happened to me.
So going forward for our listeners, do you have any way that they can reach to find a different lens for themselves? I mean, certainly not almost dying is recommended. But do you have a prescriptive for us?
I think that you have to clear your mind, and you have to really focus on what's important in your life. And what's important in your life are those relationships. And I think that if you slow down and you breathe and you don't work at such a frenetic, crazy pace, you're liable to find out what's really critically important. And by applying yourself to those things, you're liable to be a lot more productive than you would be any other way. I know that's what happened to me.
You say that a very simple concept that I love that we should all be reminded of that ties into what you just said is that most leaders and managers, which is who our audience is, they have the vision. They just forget to tell everybody else what it is.
Mm-hmm. That was my biggest problem in business. I think that's every entrepreneur has that problem because they keep it a secret, and then they get frustrated and angry when nobody else is paying attention to where they want to go. And when I realized that, and I started sharing that in daily meetings, making sure I kept reinforcing it and making sure that everybody on my team knew where we were going and why. The critical thing is why. Why are we going there? Mm-hmm. And how it benefits them. They already have an idea how it's going to benefit you. But the important thing is so everybody on your team understands how they're going to go ahead and benefit from from accomplishment of these goals and objectives.
Mitch, I have one theory on that. And I think it's because we think that it's obvious. Well, you know what? It ain't obvious. It's obvious to us, right? But it's like we think it's obvious to everybody else sometimes, and we just kind of forget that it's not so obvious.
Well, it's easy, and when you're an entrepreneur and you're locked in your office and you're thinking about making payroll. I mean, I divide the world up into two groups of people: people that have to make payroll and people who don't. Those of us who've had to make payroll understand the world differently, and when you're being attacked in that office, it's hard to think about these greater concepts that are so critically important to find success. But when you start thinking outside the office and you start realizing that all these people that you've surrounded yourself with are going to be a lot more motivated, going back to the beginning of our visit, they have to be aware of what the reason for the motivation is, how that's going to benefit them, how it's going to benefit their families, how it's going to make their lives better in some way.
Well, the book is called Misfire, misfirebook.com. Well, that's easy to remember. And let's see, your Twitter is Mitchell JS823, and you're Mitch Schneider on Facebook as well. What a pleasure meeting you today, Mitch. What a compelling story. We're so glad that you're sticking around to share your wisdom with the world.
Well, thank you so much for the opportunity. I really enjoyed it. It's always better. It's always great when you get to talk to two people that turn out to be old friends or new friends.
Mm-hmm. And make sure you check back with us and when you write that second book.
Oh, I will. It's funny. I've already been asked to write a prequel. Mm-hmm. So it'll be 3 books. It'll be a prequel and a sequel. How's that?
What happens before Misfire? That'll be interesting.
Yes.
Well, thanks for the lively conversation. And everybody, listen, if you like this conversation with Mitch, please tell a friend about our podcast. Spread the word. Mitch, you do it too with all your friends and family. Mm-hmm. Tell a friend, tell a colleague, send it to your great aunt's cousin twice removed, please. And have him or her subscribe, rate, and review our show. And you can see all the back episodes at managesmarter.com. Thanks for listening, everybody, and we'll see you next week.
Thanks for listening. If you enjoyed the show, please rate and recommend on iTunes, Overcast, or wherever you get your podcasts. You can also get more great information at salesfuel.com.